Hi everyone, welcome back to BRS TV. We are back here for part 2, again at the Minnesota Zoo. My name is Jesse with BRS Fresh, here again with Jason and Will. And if you got a chance to see the first episode when we were here with Abby, it was awesome. We got to talk all about corals and her trip to Curacao. But today we're hanging out with Christoph, who's the curator of marine mammals and the aquarium part of this zoo experience. And behind us, we've got an incredible display. This is your predator tank, right?
Yep.
And the question I have for you right off the bat is, how do you bring animals into a tank like this? What does that process look like?
Yeah, so we're constantly adding fish, sometimes sharks, to this habitat. And much like your system at home, right, you might want to multiply it by 100. So we'll bring in some new fish. We add them to an area we call our medical pool. Once they're big enough, they hang out for a couple of weeks in there. They're kind of blocked off from the rest of the inhabitants in here. Sharks get used to their smell, right? And when we go for a dive, we'll kind of let them out. If it's a bigger shark, which every now and again we'll do, we'll also kind of dive in there, keep some of the larger sharks away, and using a stretcher, we'll lower kind of one of the bigger sharks in. But it's really important for us to make sure we choose the right fish that we put in here. It makes the process a lot easier.
I bet.
Right.
Wow. Look at, who is this that's right behind us here?
That is Grace. That's
Grace.
our largest female sand tiger shark. Yep.
Wow.
She's beautiful.
Amazing.
That's crazy. So you mentioned adding fish as well as sharks to this tank. What kind of fish are you adding to it? Have you added any things that maybe hobbyists would recognize into this system?
Yeah, so the majority of the fish in here are carnivores. They're larger. You're going to find them around the Atlantic, Caribbean. For the hobbyist side of things, if you look closely, you're going to see a lot of the smaller fish. Neon gobies, we have some sergeant majors, we have damselfish in here. So there is some crossover.
And you were mentioning you added those neon gobies. You were saying that they were cleaning there was a moray eel in here as well as a grouper.
Yep.
Is that the main reason you added those guys? Because they're great
Absolutely. Yeah, I
cleaners?
mean, we love diversity, so we want to show the guests as much as we can. Small fish are important too. But yeah, they do their job. They clean our grouper and our moray eels.
That's awesome.
Yep.
Okay, well, I'm just going to get in what I'm most curious about. How do you feed a system of this size? What do you feed? How do you feed it?
Yep. So we've got over about 250 individual fish in here, 50 different species. And mostly, like I said, they're carnivores. So we do a broadcast feed where we chop up clam, capelin, herring, squid, big bucket it, and we just broadcast it out. The larger animals in here are sharks. They're target fed. So there's actually a platform we stand on, and the sharks are trained to come to a certain area in the habitat, and we'll feed them salmon, blue runner, mackerel, herring, stuff like that. And we individually track what each shark eats because it's important for us to monitor their diets.
Sure.
And then like our moray eel is pole fed, so we'll actually bring food down on a pole.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
And then what's really cool, if you ever come do a feed here, the stingrays are trained to swim up the window, so you can actually watch them feed from the guest side of things, and we'll hand feed the stingrays.
That's
Wow.
so fun.
That's pretty amazing. I noticed that you got some marks here on the acrylic,
Yeah.
and you said that was related to feeding?
Yeah, so we do sometimes drop the food for the sharks accidentally, not on
Okay.
purpose. And the sharks will go for it, and sometimes their teeth will actually hit the window, and you'll get a little chunk out of the window, which
Wow.
is unfortunate, but they're okay. And they lose teeth. These sharks lose 3 teeth a day on average, so that's
Wow.
sharks in general. So the bottom of this habitat is full of shark teeth.
That's awesome.
fun. So on average, how many times are these guys getting fed per day? Do you
Yeah.
feed the smaller fish at the same time as the bigger
Yep.
fish?
Great question. So the broadcast feed, stingray feed, is daily at 11:30, if you ever want to see that. The sharks are fed 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. And that's because in the wild, these sharks are going to eat once a week, right? They're going to eat a big meal, use up their energy, and they're okay for the week. We don't want them ever to be hungry in here. So we feed them a couple of times a week, a little bit, so that they're never really hungry.
Right. That totally makes sense. So you're adding all this large pieces, chunks of food, all this basically waste, right? Because they're going to eat it and then they'll poop it out. How do you manage all the waste in here? How do you manage all the filtration? How do you keep this water clean?
Yeah, so just like I said earlier, it's kind of like your home tank times 100. So we have filtration going, of course. Unlike your home tank, we have sand filters. So this exhibit itself has 6 large sand filters. We treat it with ozone, protein skimmers, like you're familiar with. And what's really cool is we reclaim our water. So we'll do water changes, but we set it aside in a basin, we clean that water, and we put it back. So that way we can conserve water, helps us with salt. We don't have to add salt anymore. So, and we also have an entire life support team dedicated to taking care of these large habitats.
Interesting. How do you reclaim the water?
So the sand filters are backwashed, and
Okay.
the water goes into a really big concrete holding tank, if you will, and that's backwashed again, treated with ozone, put back in the system.
Very cool.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we use ozone in the office and some tanks
Yep.
in the office there. But I imagine we have little tiny ozone
Yep.
generators. I imagine yours is pretty
We have
intense.
really large ozone generators. Yeah.
Like you're saying, everything's probably about times 100. You
Yep.
mentioning the skimmer.
Yeah.
How does that work? Because I've dealt with small skimmers. I just take it to the sink and rinse it out.
Yeah,
But
these
I
are
imagine
really-
it's not the same.
Yep, these are really big skimmers. We end up just pressure washing them.
That's
a lot
crazy. So
easier.
you have to get in there and get it all pressure washed out. And,
Yeah.
Oh, that's a nasty job.
I'm sure that's fun. We know when Will's cleaning the skimmers on all the tanks in the office.
Yeah, everyone smells it. So
Oh, yeah,
I imagine
this-
the place.
We know
is
the
pretty bad.
smell is time to clean the skimmer.
So what are some of you mentioned everything's times 100, but
Yeah.
like, what are some actual numbers? Like, first of all,
Sure.
how many gallons is this? How much salt are you adding to this? Like, what does that look
Yep, so this is approximately 215,000 gallons.
like? 215,000
1,000 gallons,
Okay,
yep.
so I'm sure I heard that.
Yeah, and when this system was set up in 1997, I wasn't here at the time, but filled it with city water, and they added, I believe, about 32,000 pound bags of Instant Ocean salt. So that's how much it took to get it. We try to keep it around 29, 30 parts per thousand. And like I said, we reclaim our water, so we don't really have to add more salt, though we do small water changes. So we do have to add water and salt every now and again, but that initial push in the beginning was about 30 bags of salt.
So you mentioned you do small water changes. That's got to be relative, right? I mean, what's a
Yep.
small water change on a 28,000 gallon system?
So we're still looking at 10% water changes. However, we only do them a few times a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So besides the filtration and doing water changes, is there any additives that you're adding to the tank? Are you doing any chemicals that you add or anything like that?
Yes, so our life support team does all the water quality and tests all the parameters here. And generally, we just need to add soda ash or bicarb for the pH.
Sure.
Other than that, it's a very stable system. I get asked a lot, such a big tank, right? You must, like, emergencies must be catastrophic or all that. But you got to remember, it's 200,000 plus gallons of of water. So if we do have a huge power outage or anything like that, it takes forever for there to be any kind of a change. So
Right. I've found that the bigger tanks in the office, when something goes wrong with them, it goes wrong really slowly over
Right.
time.
as opposed to
Right.
a nano, where
And that's one of the myths, I mean, even on the freshwater side, people think like, oh, this larger tank must be so much more difficult to take care of. And truthfully, a little 7.5 gallon tank can very quickly cause
Yep.
you problems, right?
absolutely.
That's really interesting. So beyond everything that we've just talked about, I'm curious about quarantining,
Yeah.
illness, sick animals. What's the procedure there, and how might that relate to what a hobbyist experiences?
Yeah, so we can definitely get sick or injured fish in any of the habitats. Depending on what it is and what system it's in, sometimes if there's a shark bite on a fish in here, right, we'll just let it go. They heal really fast, no problem. But if we notice that it could be something more systemic, or we get some really old fish in here, they've been around for a long time, we can take them out. We have a whole quarantine area, aquatic quarantine area at the zoo. Fantastic animal health team. We can do, x-rays, blood work, and all that on the smallest fish all the way to our large sharks.
Wow.
That's
Yeah.
crazy. So, I mean, obviously you guys really care if you're doing x-rays and things like
Yep.
that. You care so much about these animals. What happens when something giant, like a big shark, gets sick? How do you deal with that?
So generally we'd keep it in the system, just because taking a big shark out of water is not really good for anyone.
Right.
So like I said, we have our medical pool, so we can dive in here and kind of guide the sharks into the med pool. Sharks generally, when you turn them over, they go tonic, so they kind of fall asleep, if you will. So it really makes it easier for us and our animal health team to do ultrasounds or get blood. But sharks of this size are going to stay in the system when we treat them.
Interesting. Is there any sort of medications that you use, or anything that maybe relates to what we use, or Will specifically uses on the sick fish we might run into?
Yeah, so well, you mentioned quarantine. So the non-sharks, right, the bony fish, we can do copper. I don't know if you guys do copper for quarantine. We'll do formalin for treatments, praziquantel,
Yeah.
stuff like that. And of course, the old freshwater dip,
Sure.
if you got to, for the smaller fish.
Okay.
Absolutely. Doesn't sound like there's much difference between the kind of treatments. It sounds like
Yeah.
in the hobby and in the industry, it's all kind of the same.
Yep.
That's pretty cool.
So where does breeding fit into what you do here at the zoo? Obviously, that's a topic on the hobbyist side, and how does that come to be here?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're constantly looking to captive breed animals across zoos and aquariums, right? We don't want to take them from the wild as much as we can.
Okay.
So for our sharks in here, our sand tiger sharks, we are trying to get them to breed. So sand tiger sharks are critically endangered in Australia, and they're endangered in the United States. So we'd like to breed them. The only successful birth in an aquarium in the US was through artificial insemination. And we are one of the few facilities that can actually change the temperature of our water, which is the seasonal change is what triggers breeding. So we have this great population now of mature sharks, male and female. We're changing the temperatures and we're seeing a lot of breeding behavior, which is awesome. But we have not had a pregnant shark yet, a sand tiger shark. So we're hoping someday to have a sand tiger shark pup here.
That's awesome.
Very cool. And so you said that you don't have a sand tiger shark baby yet, but do you have any other sharks that have laid eggs?
Absolutely.
Or
So so tropical reef system, we have bamboo sharks in there constantly laying eggs. We get pups all the time. We also have zebra sharks in there, and we're super happy to get zebra shark pups every once in a while. We actually just had one born a couple of weeks ago.
Wow.
Yeah, they're awesome. One of my favorite sharks in the world.
So you mentioned successful breeding of the zebra sharks.
Yep.
Now I imagine you have a lot of sharks. What do you do with them?
Yeah, so zebra sharks are really cool because we're part of a program called ReShark, which takes captive-born zebra sharks and actually releases them in Indonesia where they're endangered. Our shark, our female, the mom, if you will, is a genetic match. So we're part of that program. So we're really excited, hopefully, to be able to send our zebra shark pups to Indonesia for release. Otherwise, the aquariums throughout the U.S. have a big program where we will just trade sharks for genetic purposes so that we can keep the breeding going. So like our bamboo sharks, we'll send out to other facilities or we'll receive sharks on this end.
Very cool.
Super cool. So let me ask you, as far as guest questions are concerned, obviously we're asking you some questions related to the hobby and, specific to this, but I'm just curious, you're standing here and kids are coming up to you. What kind of questions do you hear about something like this?
Yeah, by far the most popular question is why don't the sharks eat the other fish in here, right? Which is a very
question.
Very fair question.
Yeah. I mean,
So as I mentioned earlier, we feed these sharks a lot, so they're not necessarily hungry, so they're not hunting.
Okay.
We're very careful about what fish we put in here.
Sure.
So they're either going to be schooling pelagic fish that are fast and stick together, or they're going to hide in the theming so they don't get eaten. Now, every now and again, if there's a sick or an old fish that doesn't swim well, it won't be there in the morning, and there'll be a shark with a big belly. So it can happen, not often. Really quick story that's really funny is I was actually doing a show here once where I answered questions from kids at zoo camps. And one of the kids asked that question, and I said, it really doesn't happen. You don't have to worry about it. And right when I said that, a shark took out one of our big bar jacks right in front of everyone. So I had to modify my answer for the future.
You're like, about that?
Yeah, so it doesn't happen, but it can.
Yeah. Okay, so now what's next? What other animals are coming in that you can talk about, or do you have any cool projects coming up?
Yeah, so our marine mammal department's growing. We've added some sea otters that we rescued last year. So we have a great sea otter population. We got 2 brand new sea lions in just a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to be adding to that very, very soon. So we'll have more sea lions. In the aquarium world, we're always adding new fish and sharks, so there's always something new to see.
That's awesome. Well, thanks again for your time. It was great to have a chance to talk with you about the behind the scenes a little bit.
My pleasure.
And really how this relates to the hobby. That's what I think is really cool. It's just this is
Definitely.
like being a hobbyist, just on a scale of 1,000, right? So thanks again for your time. If you're in Minnesota, come visit the Minnesota Zoo, check out what they have going on, and we'll see you guys again soon.